Hello, this is Jared with Settled Christianity, coming at you with a first video in a very long time. Just been wanting to get back into doing videos to kind of help people, encourage people, and kind of help people once again get settled in the Christian faith, in the fundamentals of it, in theology, kind of in our place, being settled in our place with Christ. And I got a lot of things in the works already. There's probably, by the time you're watching this, there's probably going to be several videos kind of up on the channel. I hope to be pretty regular with uploading and giving you a lot more options about what to watch with the channel, and really pushing you, pushing you, the audience, with theology, church history, Bible studies, trying to both be something for just anybody to come and watch and enjoy and spiritually grow with. But also, I want to give something for those who are a little bit more academically minded, who do want to do the more in-depth studies about more abstract or metaphysical things. I do enjoy those talks. I do enjoy those studies. And we'll see. I got a lot of things in the works, so I won't take up too much time. I want to welcome you to this, which is walking through the minor prophets. Kind of probably call this series Exploring the Minor Prophets. And if you don't know, minor prophets are kind of these it's a section in the Bible of shorter prophets. They're in the Old Testament. This, I just feel my entire life that these get overlooked a lot. Not only are they shorter books, sometimes they're about very specific topics or very specific situations that can feel very foreign to us here in the modern church. And I've gotten a lot from the minor prophets, and I still feel like they have a ton to teach us. Both, obviously as scripture, they have something to tell us, but specifically with the time that we live in, the spiritual situation that we live in, I believe that we can get a lot from the minor prophets, and kind of learn and understand, better understand the picture that God is kind of painting throughout the scriptures. So I'm just going to go ahead and start right here with the first of the minor prophets. If you're just reading, look at a typical English Bible, you're going to be looking at the book of Hosea. Hosea is probably one of the better known of the minor prophets, maybe being beat only by Jonah. Jonah is probably the best known of the minor prophets. But Hosea, and the story of Hosea, and his marriage and kind of the turmoil that goes on with that, is a very famous story, and I'm not probably it's not something that's taught in every single church and super familiar to every Christian everywhere, but it is something I think a lot of Christians will be familiar with. But I kind of want to just start here in chapter 1, give a brief introduction and kind of walk you through this chapter, and see kind of what God has to show us through this passage. So first off, Hosea, like I said, he is coming kind of right in the decades prior to the exile of the northern kingdom of Israel. So this is in like the 700s BC, is like the later like 750s, like 730, 720 is what a lot of scholars think BC. And it kind of like lists the kings that he is contemporary to. If I'm not mistaken, so this is during the time of, so he's kind of to the northern kingdom at the same time that Isaiah is going to be preaching to the southern kingdom. So it's not just that the minor prophets are coming after the quote unquote major prophets, and I don't think in those days they would have viewed themselves in those terms. So it's not like they're coming after the major prophets. Many times they were contemporary, and many times were most likely aware of the other prophets preaching in other areas of Israel. But like I said, they're referred to as minor prophets primarily for the length of the book. All right. So this is kind of the picture that we're kind of leading into is the fall of the northern kingdom, the exile of the northern kingdom. It's coming very quickly due to sins, due to injustice in the kingdom, due to idolatry in the kingdom. And Hosea is going to have a very, very powerful and poignant picture, illustration in his very life. And we see this a lot in the lives of the prophets, where they actually do things to demonstrate spiritual realities. And of kind of all the prophets, Hosea is one of the most dramatic versions of that. So let's just go ahead and jump in here. Chapter 1 of Hosea, verse 1. I'm just going to kind of briefly read the first chapter. It's only 11 verses, and then we'll kind of like piece through it, kind of walk through it carefully and explain what we're looking at. So here it says, the word of the Lord that came unto Hosea, the son of Beri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. It says, the beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea, and the Lord said to Hosea, go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord. So he went to Gomer, the daughter of Diblam, which conceived and bare him a son. And the Lord said unto him, call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. And it shall come to pass that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. And she conceived again, and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, call her name Lo Ruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, nor by horses, nor by horsemen. Now when she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, call his name Lo Ami, for ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. Yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sands of the sea, the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. And I'll pause right there and kind of walk through this passage. So, obviously, if you don't already know, Hosea is very famous for this command from God for Hosea to marry. It literally says, go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms. Means that he married seemingly a prostitute, or a woman who would very quickly become a prostitute. There's a couple different ways that you can interpret that. Scholars are kind of go about it in a couple different ways. There's views, probably the most prominent views in evangelical, like conservative circles, is that either he married an actual prostitute, that she was actively a prostitute, and he married her, and that this was not in violation of any commands of God, because he was not a priest, and therefore commands in the Bible to not marry a prostitute did not apply to him. And the second one, probably more popular, is the view that he married a woman who would then become a prostitute. So it's very possible that God guided Hosea to marry a particular woman, knowing that this woman would be unfaithful. I personally lean that direction, because I think that the New Testament idea to not be unequally yoked. This does not just mean with people of, this doesn't mean just to people who don't share your religion, though it does apply to that. But this idea that do not marry people and do not yoke yourself to people who are not serving God and who is living a sinful life. Now, I believe that while this is most clearly articulated in the New Testament, it is still the overall principle of God, and we see this throughout the Bible. I don't want to kind of hold us up here by giving different ideas of this. Obviously, the rebuilding of the temple afterwards and the Ezra and Nehemiah and dealing with the marriages in that day, that comes to mind. That God takes very seriously all throughout the Bible. Do not be unequally yoked to someone who is not serving God, who is living in sin. So I don't believe that God uh, is commanding him to go out and marry a prostitute. I think he is telling him that you will marry a woman and she will become a prostitute. Like she will betray you in that way. And this, of course, is a picture of Israel. And this is another point kind of in the favor of this interpretation is that Israel, of course, started off pure and went into spiritual adultery, a spiritual fornication. And ultimately, I think this is a picture of Hosea and his wife Gomer. That I would argue that the marriage started off pure, and that Gomer at some point abandons him or betrays him and turns to a sinful lifestyle. And I think this is ultimately um, such a powerful picture of the betrayal, the spiritual betrayal that Israel had committed against God. I think that, I mean, especially this idea that Hosea marries this woman and has kids with her, and she betrays him and is unfaithful to him. I think that there are so few things in life that could reach that level of betrayal and that level of hurt, um, just to be involved in a marriage and to love someone, for that person to betray you in that way. I think that there are few things in this life that can like hurt a person as much as that. And to think that this is God is painting this picture that he says like this is um, ultimately this is what Israel is doing to him. That ultimately Israel is in this covenantal relationship with God, and yet they keep betraying him. They keep turning and going off to other lovers, so to say. They keep going to Baal, the Baal worship, and building these groves and worshiping false gods. And this is a reoccurring theme all throughout the Old Testament, that over and over and over, Israel has these small moments of time where they get right. You see with the judges and a couple times with the righteous kings, and then with certain righteous prophets, and you see that they are corrected, they are brought right, but eventually they do slide back into being unfaithful. And let's kind of just walk through here and highlight a couple things. So number one, I do want to highlight here because I think there will be some people who is just by default uncomfortable with this reality that God called Hosea, even if you want to say that, well, Gomer wasn't a prostitute when he married her, or Gomer wasn't actively living a sinful lifestyle. God will only knew that she would eventually turn to that lifestyle. I think there's going to be some people who's really uncomfortable with that. Like that doesn't sit right with them. Like, oh, why does God let that happen? And I'll just say that ultimately, and we see this in the book, in the scripture, we see that God uses Hosea's marriage to this woman living in sin as a way to redeem her out of that sin and to bring her out of it. And so it is, it is for the good of Gomer, definitely, but ultimately it is for the good of Hosea himself that he in some way gets to portray in a very small scale the love of God for us, obviously to Israel, but to his covenantal people. This is Hosea getting to play a little part in seeing how God loves us. And I think Hosea is ultimately strengthened through this, and that by trusting God as he does throughout this book, we see that God works through him. And I think we have to acknowledge that, ultimately God's providence behind these situations, that God brings about certain, sometimes painful, difficult situations. He allows, he permits certain sinful behaviors to go on for certain amounts of time, for a greater good, for His glory, for the strengthening of the saints, for hopefully for evangelizing, for that sin in some way that perhaps is past our knowledge, that God uses that to bring more people into the kingdom. I mean, obviously, it talks about this in Romans, that all things work together for good, to them who trust in Him, who walk in the Spirit. I'm not quoting it right. This is on me for not having that verse wrote down. But this idea that, um, ultimately, and I think, just going off of this, I find it interesting. Just going off the straight info that we have right here, I would just say that I think Hosea may have already been looking to marry Gomer. Maybe was already like striving to marry her, because in no place here does it say this is the woman I want you to marry. Um, and I think Hosea was very possibly already like looking to marry Gomer, and God was just informing him like, "Hey, this is what's going to happen. I'm involved in this situation. I am behind this. Just know that I am going to give you grace kind of through it." So I'll just say that I think it's very possible that this was already a situation that had been providentially brought about or been permitted by God, and God was, uh, through the prophetic, was telling Hosea, kind of laying the groundwork for Hosea to not become bitter or not to kind of abandon, his post as a prophet. He was giving him the strength needed for the trial he was about to go through. So let's start here. Let's look at verse 2. The beginning of the word of the Lord by Hosea. And the Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take unto thee a wife of whoredoms and children of whoredoms, for the land hath committed great whoredom, departing from the Lord." This is what I was talking about. Is that Israel keeps leaving God over and over and over. And he says, you're gonna play the part of me here. You're going to demonstrate through your life what this looks like spiritually. And I just, man, I think, if we just grasp that in our life, when we, literally the Bible says that we cannot serve both God and mammon. When we are pulled away from God to this world, even if in our minds, even if it's minor or it's not that big of a deal, it is a big deal. It is spiritual whoredom. That's how the Bible describes it. But I don't want to, keep getting caught up on that. Let's continue on. So he says, "So he went and took Gomer, the daughter of Diblam, which conceived and bare him a son." And it says, "And the Lord said to him, Call his name Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu, and will cause to cease the kingdom of the house of Israel. Um, um, uh, and it shall come to pass that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." So I'll pause here. I'll mention, because there's a couple, there's a little bit of an interpretive difficulty here with this idea of Jezreel and how Jehu plays in. So Jezreel is a location there in this area where Hosea was, or yes, Hosea was. That is a site for many, many fights, battles, bloodshed, massacres. This is a very, very, traumatic, bloody place, there in Israel. And it references specifically that I will avenge the blood of Jezreel upon the house of Jehu. Um, and the house of Jehu is generally understood as the northern kingdom. Jehu was the last kind of king. His family was not the last king, but like last dynasty of the northern kingdom. And so kind of he is being used here as kind of like this fill-in for the whole northern kingdom. Um, but what's interesting here is that God is kind of portraying the sins through the lens of the sins of Jehu. And part of the issue here that this harkens back to 2 Kings 9, 24 through chapter 10 and 17, where it talks about Jehu. Jehu gets anointed to be king. Elisha sends a son of one of the prophets to anoint him, tells him to be king. He goes, anoints him, tells him, you're going to be king, and you're going to kill the family of Ahab. You're going to kill Jezebel. You're going to wrought vengeance on all of these people. And Jehu, indeed, he goes forward and becomes this, leads this extremely violent, albeit successful, attack on the family of Ahab. And obviously we could spend some time talking about how horrifically evil Ahab and Jezebel was, that whole family. But the problem that some people have here in 2 Kings, and looking at 1 Kings. So in 2 Kings, chapter 10 and verse 30, this is what it says about Jehu. It says, and the Lord said unto Jehu, because thou hast done well in executing that which is right in mine eyes, and hast done unto the house of Ahab according to all that was in mine heart, the children of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. All right, so we look here and we find Hosea is seemingly condemning the house, like condemning Jehu. Is seemingly saying Jehu did wrong, was sinful, like he was not correct. He was not being holy in doing these acts. How do we square this with 2 Kings 10:30 when it talks about, like, well, basically God saying, yeah, like I approve of what you did to Ahab and his family. Well, there's a couple things here, and like I said, I want to try to keep this at least under half an hour, make it a little bit succinct, so I don't want to dive into the whole history of Ahab and everything. But essentially, there's a couple interpretations here. The two, the one possibility is that Jehu just went overboard with killing. And what you find here is that indeed God had prophesied that Ahab and his family was going to be killed. But if you read, not only did Jehu kill Ahab and his immediate family, he killed so many people, the servants of Ahab, all the children of Ahab, Jezebel, all the servants there in vicinity. And so there's some that say, like, oh, okay, like some of this was justified. Like some of these were actual sinful people who were living in sin, who did deserve the judgment of God. But Jehu kind of overstepped his bounds and started killing people out of just vengeance. So that is one aspect, and I think it could play into some part of this. But secondly, I also think that Jehu did have some sin issues in his life. And this is, if you go back to 2 Kings again, chapter 10, what we find is that both 29 and 31, so the two verses, the verse leading before that passage I read and the one after that passage, kind of describes Jehu as not a holy man. So this is 29. It says, howbeit from the sins of Jeroboam the son of Nebat, who made Israel to sin, Jehu departed not from after them, to wit, the golden calves that were in Bethel and that were in Dan. It says, and the Lord said unto Jehu, because thou hast done well in executing that which is right in mine eyes, and hast done unto the house of Ahab according to all that was in mine heart, thy children of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. Now verse 31, but Jehu took no heed to walk in the law of the Lord God of Israel with all his heart, for he departed not from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel to sin. So I think this is a valid idea as well, that even though God approved of the judgment on Ahab, that we should not see Jehu as a righteous individual in this, that in a similar way he's playing like the Chaldeans play in the Old Testament, how they are wicked, and yet God uses them to bring judgment, and then in turn judges them for the actions they did. In a similar fashion, Jehu seemingly was not a righteous man. He was doing this for selfish gain, for vengeance, and God used him to bring judgment to people who deserved judgment, and in turn was judging him for those sins. I think that is the case. We see this kind of throughout, that there is a type of intensity in which he kills people. I mean, you read of Jezebel, who's terribly wicked, just horrifically wicked, but she's thrown from the window, and it says that he tramples over her on his horses. I mean, this is not a man who is just enacting the judgments of God. This is an individual who is being particularly vicious, particularly cold, who is doing this, I think, out of wrath. So I think there's that. I think I have seen a little bit of talk that, in a way, this could just be a picture um, that perhaps that this is talking about essentially Jehu's family, and that his whole family had gone wrong. So maybe Jehu was okay in those actions, but his whole family had gone wrong. And so what this passage is really saying in Hosea is that the blood and the violence that went on there with Jehu. So basically, the punishment and the judgment that Jehu wrought against Ahab, that same judgment from that in the fields of Jezreel is now going to be wrought against Jehu. I think that's very possible as well, since we see mention of Jezreel several times here in this book. But those are kind of the ideas. I think there's probably little bits and pieces of all of this. I think there was aspects where Jehu did go way further than God desired for him, than anybody commanded him to. I think he did have overkill. He literally he overkilled. He didn't just kill the people who deserved it, but he just killed indiscriminately. I think he did have sin problems, but on top of that, I think that his whole family was also wicked. The family that came after him was wicked, and that in part the judgment against Ahab at the fields of Jezreel is now going to be turned against his family and against his whole house as a whole. All right, so that's why I want to leave it here. On verse 4, I think that the major picture I want to see is that God is bringing out judgment, that God is correcting, making right, that God, in his faithfulness, and this is a reoccurring idea, that God is faithful in Hosea. He is the faithful spouse who is calling for Israel to return, and in this way, he says he's faithful in that he doesn't forget injustices. He says, you will still be judged for these wicked acts. And so he goes on, he says, and I shall come to pass that day, I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. So he says that all of Israel, that this northern kingdom, you are going to be brought to the place of that Jezreel again. Like, you're going, like, this place which is known for violence and terror, just horrible violence. He says this is going to be, your whole northern kingdom is going to be consumed by this. Like, this judgment is coming for you, and you're not going to be able to stand up against it. He says your bows will be broken. He says you're not going to be able to stop it when it comes. When I pour out my judgment, it will not be stopped. It goes on, and she conceived again. And so if you remember, Hosea's first child is Jezreel, dealing specifically with the sins of this. And I think it's about this coming judgment, all right? And it says, and she conceived again and bare a daughter. And God said unto him, call her name Lo Ruhamah, for I will no more have mercy upon the house of Israel, but I will utterly take them away. Lo Ruhamah, as you might have guessed, means no mercy, is essentially speaking. And I think this is a picture that God is conveying through the children of Hosea, that ultimately I have arrived at a place where judgment is going to be coming. You're going to go into exile. There's not going to be mercy in this. That they had basically passed the point where there was no coming back from it. That's what we see in Hosea's second child. And then but we still turn here, and it says, but I will have mercy upon the house of Judah. This is verse 7. But I will have mercy upon the house of Judah, and I will save them by the Lord their God, and will not save them by bow, nor by sword, nor by battle, by horses, nor by horsemen. Now when so you know, it says, like, I will have mercy on the southern kingdom. He says that ultimately northern kingdom, as you might know, northern kingdom goes into exile and is as far as human perception goes, is lost. The southern kingdom remains, though. He says that there is mercy still there. It says, now when she had weaned Lo Ruhamah, she conceived and bare a son. Then said God, call his name Lo Ami, for ye are not my people, and I will not be your God. And I love this. So he says here that basically you've abandoned me, you've made me not your God anymore, and you are not my people anymore. Now look, we're already in the first chapter, in all of this judgment, in the midst of all this wickedness, God is reassuring them in the promises. He says, yet the number of the children of Israel shall not be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured nor numbered. And it shall come to pass that in the place where it was said unto them, ye are not my people, there it shall be said unto them, ye are the sons of the living God. Then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. And so he turns here. So he says there's judgment, there is wickedness, there's fornication. There's not going to be mercy. You're going to be put out of this family, essentially. He says, but no, that the covenant is still there. The promises are still there. This does not void the promises I have made. Israel will still have, he says that the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. He harkens back to the promises made to Abraham. He harkens back to the foundational promises. They are still there. God is still faithful. God is still good, even when we're not, even when Israel isn't. God is still faithful and good. And he says that in that day, then shall the children of Judah and the children of Israel be gathered together, and appoint themselves one head, and they shall come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. And he describes this day of Jezreel. I think this is hearkening towards ultimately the end judgment of it all. That there will be a coming judgment in which God brings together Israel again. Like I said, I know that anytime you talk about end time stuff, it gets complicated. But ultimately, I think verses like this very clearly state that there will be a day of Jezreel, there will be a coming day of tribulation, a day of trouble, of judgment poured out on the earth. And he says that I will still be working as he was working then, as he's working now when the trial, tribulations, and judgment comes. So too will he be working in that day of great judgment, in that day of Jezreel, when violence and judgment is poured out on the earth. God will still be working, and he will be working to, once again, bring Israel back together as a covenantal people. But I will leave it there. That is chapter 1. Hopefully in the future chapters, I'm able to get this a little bit more succinct. But Hosea is such a beautiful passage, and I want you to take away that God is faithful even when we're not. If you don't already, go ahead and subscribe. Turn on the notifications down below. Leave a comment if you have any questions. And as always, thank you for coming and listening, and be on the lookout for our new videos coming soon. Thank you.